Tonight we dive into the harsh, the thrilling, and the ugly truth of a substance that offered everything. Forget what movies show you. Living through it, honestly, was draining. So before we begin, please hit the like button and subscribe, but only if you truly appreciate what I create here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always interesting to discover who's watching from different corners of the globe. Put your phone aside, keep the sound low. Let's begin. In the cold, thin atmosphere of the tall Andes Mountains, where breathing is difficult and the sun burns fiercely, a simple green plant was more than just food. For thousands of years, it held sacred meaning. Before golden empires existed, before Spanish ships damaged the skyline, there was coca, the holy plant. Its beginnings are hidden in South America's ancient past, a faint trace in historical records going back at least 8,000 years. Evidence of its chemical compound has been discovered in the hair of preserved bodies from Peru's coastline. Remains wrapped in beautiful fabrics and buried with a tiny bag, a chuspa, holding a carefully kept bundle of the dried plant material. This wasn't something done casually. This was a ceremonial agreement between people and the harsh environment. The plant itself looks ordinary, really just a bush with shiny green egg-shaped foliage and tiny white blossoms that produce crimson fruits. It grows best on the damp, steep hillsides of the Yungas, the eastern slopes of the Andes, a dangerous vertical landscape where fog hugs the mountainsides. Here, old civilizations learned to shape the ground into terraces, to construct complex stone walls that rose toward the heavens, building climbing fields for their holy harvest. For the Inca, the final and mightiest of the Andean kingdoms, this plant was the center of their existence. They named it Mamacoca, a female god, a present from the sun deity Inti to ease the pain of his people. But this present wasn't given without cost, and it definitely wasn't for everybody. The Inca nation was an impressive example of strict organization, a huge centrally managed kingdom linked by an extensive system of stone-paved highways, and coca was controlled by the government. Its consumption was a carefully protected luxury kept for the Sapa Inca himself, the nobles, the religious leaders, and a select few other chosen groups. When religious figures wanted to connect with the gods or predict what was coming, they would chew a bundle of foliage, the lump placed in their cheek, slowly releasing its strength. The designs the foliage created when thrown onto a special cloth were interpreted as signs, directing choices about government, about battle, about survival and death. When a powerful leader traveled, he brought a supply of coca. When a worker was forced into the mita, the required government work that constructed the temples of Cusco and the strongholds of Machu Picchu, he received a daily amount of foliage. It wasn't meant for enjoyment. It was energy. It stopped hunger pains. It reduced the pain of tiredness, and it prevented the damaging impact of mountain sickness. The empire's veins were its highways, and its energy was the chasqui, the royal messenger. These individuals were the Inca communication system, a chain of runners who could deliver a report from Quito to Cusco, a journey of more than 1,000 miles in less than 7 days. They ran in exhausting bursts from one tiny stone station to the following, and their steady partner was the coca plant. It provided them the strength to overcome the mountain trails, to run until their chests ached, to bring the emperor's orders before they became outdated. The Spanish conquistadors who came in 1532 witnessed this custom and through the strict perspective of their own religion saw only false worship. The Catholic clergy announced it a weapon of evil, a barrier to religious change. Early orders from Lima tried to prohibit its growing and consumption completely, but this religious confidence quickly crashed against a far stronger power, money. Spanish hadn't traveled to the new continent for spirits. They had traveled for silver, and buried within the ground, at a terrible height of 13,000 feet, they discovered a mountain filled with it. Potosi. To extract the silver from the depths of that mountain, they needed workers, an unlimited supply of replaceable workers. They took and twisted the mita structure, compelling tens of thousands of native men into the dark, airless passages. The labor was savage, the surroundings deadly. Men perished from cave-ins, from mercury contamination used in the purifying method, from pure tiredness, and the Spanish rapidly, practically, understood what the Inca had understood forever. The coca plant could push men to labor past human limits. It permitted the mine bosses to provide their laborers less food, to demand more from them, to pull more silver with reduced expenses. And so the church stayed silent. The same religious leaders who had named coca the devil's tool now possessed coca farms. The plant, once a sacred right, became payment, an instrument of colonial control. It was the oil for the huge device of theft that channeled the riches of the Andes into the vaults of the Spanish kingdom, powering the golden period of an empire halfway across the planet. For 3 centuries, the plant stayed in its mountain homeland, a regional blessing and a regional curse, its real strength locked within, waiting for the interested thoughts of a separate continent to open it. That opening happened not in a holy place, but in a research room. As the 19th century arrived, European science was in a rush of breakthrough, examining the physical world and listing its pieces. Plant scientists and chemists were fascinated with alkaloids, the strong nitrogen-holding substances discovered in vegetation. They had previously separated morphine from the opium flower, quinine from the cinchona tree, and caffeine from coffee seeds. The simple coca plant, which had started arriving in Europe in dried bundles for scientific interest, was a natural following target. In 1855, a German scientist named Friedrich Gaedtke succeeded in separating a rough yellowish material he named erythroxylon. But the method was wasteful, the result impure. The ultimate success arrived 5 years afterward in 1860 in the peaceful university town of Göttingen. Graduate researcher named Albert Niemann, working beneath the respected scientist Friedrich Wöhler, improved the technique using a careful sequence of chemical treatments and separations. He pulled out a clean crystalline alkaloid, white, without smell, bitter. He wrote in his research paper how a small amount of crystals put on his mouth made it turn numb, a temporary deadening. He provided this fresh material, a correct scientific title taken from the vegetation, and the typical alkaloid ending, cocaine. The planet didn't instantly pay attention. The finding sat in research journals for a while, a small note in the big progress of chemistry. Its return to the planet arrived not through research but through business, and with a drink of wine. Angelo Mariani, a clever Corsican businessman in Paris, had a brilliant idea. He realized that the European crowd was tired, worried, and charmed with the concept of scientific remedies that could bring back their energy. In 1863, he started bringing in tons of excellent Peruvian coca foliage and soaking them in quality Bordeaux wine. The alcohol worked as a remover, pulling the cocaine from the foliage and making a strong, tasty drink. He named it Vin Mariani. It was a hit. Mariani was a promotional wizard, maybe the first of his type. He requested recommendations from everybody who was significant. Popes Leo X and Pius VI supported it. Leo even gave Mariani a Vatican Golden Award. Queen Victoria consumed it. Thomas Edison said it assisted him remain awake through extended nights of creating. Ulysses S. Grant drank it while composing his life story, battling throat illness. Authors from Émile Zola to Jules Verne wrote praising words. Mariani's promotions were throughout, declaring his coca wine as the best remedy for tiredness, sadness, and sickness. It was the ideal remedy for the wild energy of the Belle Époque. The operations were remarkable. A worldwide delivery network extending from the tall Andes to a Parisian manufacturing plant, which then delivered millions of containers of this cocaine-filled wine to a ready planet, America, constantly ready to enhance a European achievement, quickly copied it. In Atlanta, Georgia, a druggist named John Stith Pemberton was struggling with his own troubles. A Confederate soldier injured in the Civil War, he was hooked on morphine, a typical problem among ex-soldiers handled with the strong pain medicine. Looking for a remedy for his own habit and motivated by Mariani's achievement, he made Pemberton's French wine coca. It was basically an American form of Vin Mariani, and it was right away well liked. But in 1886, Pemberton's business faced a regional problem. Fulton County passed alcohol prohibition. Alcohol was now forbidden. Not stopped, Pemberton rushed to change his remedy. He switched the wine foundation with a sweet syrup and fizzy water, included a substance from the caffeine-filled cola seed for an additional boost, and maintained the coca plant substance. He named his fresh temperance-approved invention Coca-Cola. The miracle drink was created, marketed from the drink counter as a remedy for headaches, anxiety, and tiredness. Each drink held a meaningful amount of cocaine, a reality the business now understandably avoids discussing, but which was at that time its main marketing feature. While business owners were getting the crowd excited, the medical world was keeping pace, thanks mostly to the excited support of a young, driven Viennese brain doctor, Sigmund Freud. In 1884, Freud was still years from creating psychoanalysis. He was a struggling scientist searching for a breakthrough that would establish his reputation and wealth. He found reports of cocaine's impacts and started testing on himself. He was thrilled. In his important work, Über Coca, he praised the material in joyful language. He announced it a wonder medicine, a remedy for sadness, a booster that created a sensation of joy and lasting happiness with no bad impacts. Most harmfully, he advertised it as a cure for morphine habit. He provided it to his sick people, to his companions, to his fiancée Martha, to strengthen her and give her pink cheeks. Freud's huge mental power provided cocaine a mark of acceptance it had missed. It was no more just a piece in a well-liked remedy. It was a significant healing substance. His research motivated a partner, the eye doctor Carl Koller, to explore Niemann's first finding about the numbing impact. In a sequence of smart tests, Koller found that a mixture of cocaine used to the eye made it totally insensitive to pain. In 1884, he showed his results, doing surgery on the eye of a completely awake creature, and then a person without any indication of pain. The crowd of doctors was amazed. This was the creation of local numbing. It changed surgery, especially in sensitive areas like eye care and tooth care. Before cocaine, such methods were either cruelly quick or done on sick people knocked asleep with ether or chloroform. Now, a surgeon could operate cautiously on a particular area of the body, while the sick person stayed conscious and comfortable. In the last 20 years of the 19th century, cocaine was ruler. It was the Victorian period's miracle medicine, a cure-all for the modern time. The American drug business Park Davis marketed it in every possible way: powder, cigarettes, needle shot kits complete with a bottle of cocaine hydrochloride, even a Coca-Cola motivated soft beverage of their own named Coca-Cola. You could purchase cocaine-filled throat tablets for singers and speakers, and tooth pain drops for baby teething. It was praised in medical papers, promoted in common magazines, and used by millions who thought they were just taking a refined, scientifically accepted treatment for the pressures of everyday living. The plant of the Andes had been emptied of its spirit, its alkaloids separated and increased, and its strength released upon a planet that was totally charmed by its offer and totally unprepared for its cost. The drop from favor was as quick as the climb was amazing. The quiet cautions that had been ignored as stories quickly became a loud alarm. The wonder remedy started to show its darker nature. Doctors started to document a worrying, fresh design among their sick people, and all too frequently among themselves. People who had begun taking cocaine for sadness or tiredness discovered they couldn't quit. The joy turned into fear, restlessness, and frightening visions. A typical one was the feeling of bugs moving beneath the skin, something that became called cocaine insects or formication. The offer of better ability spoiled into obsessive, repeated actions and a complete breakdown of reasoning. The wonder medicine was making a fresh and especially cruel type of habit. No situation was more damaging than one from Sigmund Freud's own group. He had excitedly handled his close companion, Dr. Ernst von Fleischl-Marxow, for morphine habit by giving large amounts of cocaine. The outcome was a disaster. Fleischl-Marxow traded one habit for another much more harmful one. He fell into a complete cocaine madness, destroyed by fearful false beliefs and the constant suffering of white snakes moving over his skin. He passed away a few years afterward, a destroyed individual. The event shocked Freud. He stopped his open support for cocaine and seldom mentioned it afterward. But the harm was finished. The spirit he had assisted free from the container was now destroying the lives of individuals across Europe and America. The common story started to change, pushed by dramatic press, ready for a fresh villain. Where promotions had once praised cocaine's goodness, newspaper titles now yelled about its badness. Tales of upper-class scandals, of hopeful careers destroyed, of riches wasted on the white substance became usual. But the ethical fear took on its most evil and lasting shape in the United States, where it became permanently and purposely tangled with the nation's deepest worries about race. In the American South, shocking and totally false tales started to spread claiming that cocaine consumption was widespread among African American workers. These stories were designed to increase white terror. Papers printed alarming reports of cocaine-crazed Negroes doing terrible crimes with superhuman power and cleverness. A well-known piece in the New York Times in 1914, written by a Dr. Edward Huntington Williams, stated that cocaine made black men better shooters and made them temporarily protected from gun bullets. Southern police groups even started changing to bigger guns, saying the requirement for greater stopping strength against these claimed drug-powered madmen. This was a planned racial lie. It changed the cocaine consumer from a sad, frequently white middle-class victim of medical trend into a harmful black criminal hunter. The medicine was no more just a personal fault. It was a danger to the community arrangement, a trigger for racial battle that required a fast and strong government answer. The machinery of federal rules, which had been moving slowly, started to speed up. An early important action was the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. Pushed by investigative reporters revealing the dishonest and frequently harmful contents of health medicines, the law didn't prohibit any materials, it just required correct labeling. For the first time, businesses had to list ingredients like alcohol, morphine, and cocaine on their item packaging. The impact was instant. Buyers were surprised to discover that the calming syrups they provided their kids were filled with opiates and that their preferred energy remedies were packed with cocaine. Confronted with common anger and the danger of reduced sales, numerous makers quietly changed their items. It was around 1903, even before the rule was approved, that the Coca-Cola Company, aware of the shifting attitudes, took out the active cocaine alkaloid from its main beverage, changing to decaffeinated coca plant substance to keep the title and taste character. But labeling wasn't sufficient for the increasing number of reformers, temperance supporters, and race baiters requesting complete prohibition. The diplomatic platform offered the last push. The United States, trying to grow its power in Asia, wanted to assist China stop its terrible opium disaster. To possess the ethical power to guide worldwide anti-drug meetings, America first had to organize its own situation. The outcome was the peak of 20 years of increasing fear, the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1914. On its surface, the Harrison Act wasn't a prohibition rule. It was a tax rule designed as a piece of income law to survive legal problems. It needed any individual who brought in, made, marketed, or gave out cocaine and opiates to sign up with the federal government, pay a unique tax, and utilize particular request papers. It appeared like a straightforward issue of control, but its application changed American community. The Treasury Department workers assigned with applying the act understood its rules in the most strict manner possible. They decided that giving narcotics to an addict to keep their habit wasn't a proper medical action. Doctors who kept doing so were bothered, captured, and charged. Numerous were jailed. The medical field, frightened, rapidly stepped away from handling habit completely. The results were deep and instant. The availability of legal cocaine, once obtainable over the table at any drugstore, disappeared. The consumer, who a decade earlier had been viewed as a sick person or a buyer, was now legally changed into a lawbreaker. The act didn't halt cocaine consumption. It just pushed it beneath the ground. It shut the entrance of the drugstore and the drink counter, and in doing so, created a fresh, darker entrance, the one that guided to the rear street, the illegal cellar, and the huge, brutal, and hugely profitable underground market. The period of cocaine as a medical wonder was finished. Its rule as a community danger and as the power for a century of wrongdoing and battle was just starting. With the mark of a pen and the righteous confidence of rule creators, the crystalline substance was expelled. Pushed from the bright tables of drugstores and the happy fizz of drink counters, it didn't disappear. Naturally not. It just traveled with a separate type of individual. Prohibition, you understand, seldom destroys a wish. It just increases the cost and selects the visitor list. And so cocaine, emptied of its medical acceptance, experienced a remarkable change. It became a mystery, and mysteries, particularly costly ones, are the most desired of all position marks. The substance became the secret handshake of the fresh. Elite, a sparkling connection for those who existed ahead of the trend, or just beyond the rule. In the roaring 20s, a time drunk on homemade alcohol and happy with rebellion, cocaine was the ideal decoration. It was the invisible presence in the device of the jazz period. in the cloudy blue, smoke-filled secret bars of New York, Chicago, and New Orleans, where the wild energy of the Charleston shook the floorboards. A tiny, careful container was an indication that you were actually part of the inner group. It was quick. It was current. It was shockingly illegal. It was everything the time celebrated. For the flapper with her short hair and newfound freedoms, it was a method to move until sunrise. For the Wall Street investor, filled with money from a market that only continued rising, it was a method to feel as powerful as his investment collection. The material was talked about quietly, provided in hushed sounds in the powder spaces of big hotels or the rear seats of rumbling cars. It was a power for the celebration that was never supposed to finish, a chemical promise that the evening and the decade would shine brighter and quicker than any that had arrived before. This secret group of pleasure had its western branch naturally, in a sun-soaked town that was busy creating the nation's fantasies, Hollywood. In the blinking, silent world of early movies, the demands were huge. Riches were created overnight. An unknown young woman from Ohio could become a goddess in a few months. Her appearance displayed 30 feet tall for the love of millions. The film companies required impossible hours, endless energy, and a steady, brilliant show both on and off the display. In this testing ground of fame, the small white substance discovered a very accepting home. They named it Girl or Nose Candy, a playful title for a requiring chemical master. It was the pickup before an extended evening of filming beneath hot, bright lights. The community oil at a wild weekend celebration in a Laurel Canyon house. The quiet partner in numerous A-stars shooting climb and sad drop. The passing of heartthrob. Wallace Reed in 1923, officially from morphine habit gained after an onset injury, pulled the curtain back just sufficient for the crowd to see the decay underneath the beauty. It was a shock that frightened the film company leaders, not due to the human expense, but due to the danger to the ticket sales. The business rushed to control itself with the Hays Code, a fresh collection of ethical rules. But all it actually did was push the mysteries deeper below ground, making them even more attractive for those who could pay for them. The substance wasn't only for the pleasure seekers. It additionally discovered a spot among the intellectuals, the authors, and the creators. In the bohemian neighborhoods of Greenwich Village and the smoky cafes of post-war Paris, cocaine was shown not as a celebration gift, but as an opener to release understanding, to break the boring, to power the machine of imagination through the isolated early hours of the morning. For the surrealist painter, it could provide a short, sharp picture. For the writer fighting with the big American book, it was a method to maintain the words coming, to push beyond the wall of tiredness and uncertainty. It was viewed as an instrument, a mental booster that could sharpen the thoughts and remove the coverings of truth. This, naturally, was a lovely and harmful false belief. The imagination it appeared to motivate was frequently just wild, scattered energy. The deep understandings, just the circular self-talking wanderings of a brain chemistry gone wrong. But the story was strong. It covered the medicine in a covering of mental seriousness, making it a holy object for the advanced group. And who provided this secret planet? Who linked the Hollywood actress with the Parisian poet, the criminal underground? Naturally, the same clever cold business people who operated the alcohol smuggling kingdom saw an ideal chance for item variety. People like Arnold Rothstein, the New York crime lord who supposedly fixed the 1919 World Series, realized the straightforward money-making of wrongdoing. Cocaine was a luxury item. It was small amount, high profit, and easy to carry. It didn't need groups of trucks or huge storage buildings like illegal alcohol. Just a few well-positioned smugglers, a system of careful sellers, and you could provide the richest, most powerful corners of community. The delivery paths were still basic, frequently depending on proper drug supplies redirected from Europe or tiny chance shipments from South America. But the basis was being created. The requirement was created. Cocaine had discovered its fresh identity, a prohibited luxury, a substance that divided the brave, the decadent, and the cursed from the regular planet. It was an offer of energy, of cleverness, of fitting in, a very costly offer, paid for in money at first, and then certainly in different payments. While the bright young individuals of the North were finding the illegal excitement of the substance, its tale was starting in seriousness far to the south beneath the tall, thin sun of the Andes. For ages, the native individuals of Peru and Bolivia had a connection with the coca plant that was nothing but wild. It was an issue of staying alive. They chewed the foliage, frequently combined with a bit of ash or lime to assist release the alkaloids, for power to labor at punishing heights, to hold off hunger, and for ceremony and healing reasons. The coca plant was a present from the gods, a holy vegetation woven into the actual material of their way of life. It was a gentle booster, a portion of the scenery as typical and as necessary as the potato. The change of this holy plant into a worldwide item is a tale of chemistry, drive, and location. It starts not with crime groups, but with silent business, chemists and smugglers, who noticed a chance to link the old farming wealth of the Andes with the increasing nervous hunger of the planet. In the center of the 20th century, the first genuine leaders of the worldwide cocaine business started to appear. They weren't at first the showy narcos of afterward legend. They were frequently sharp, thinking business people working in the darkness. For a while, the center of this early business was not Colombia, but the extended coastal country of Chile. In towns like Valparaiso and Santiago, smugglers who had learned their skills in different crimes noticed the chance. One of the important people was a Chilean woman called the Godmother, a restaurant owner who utilized her company as a cover to construct one of the first big trafficking systems in the 1960s. Her group was advanced for its period. They didn't just transport the item, they managed the making. The method they created became the design for the whole business. It was a dark chemistry, changing a green plant into a white substance. First, the coca foliage gathered by poor farmers in the distant valleys of Peru and Bolivia were brought to rough, hidden holes in the forest. There they were soaked in gasoline or kerosene and crushed into a mush, frequently by men stepping on them with their bare feet. This mixture was then combined with acid and different chemicals to pull out the raw cocaine alkaloids, making a rough off-white material called pasta base, or coca paste. This paste was the important middle item. It was much more tight and strong than the raw foliage, making it simpler to smuggle across borders. The coca paste would be flown in tiny rickety planes from the forests of Bolivia and Peru into the deserts of northern Chile. There, in secret laboratories, frequently nothing more than shacks or hidden basements, the last careful phase of improvement would happen. Chemists, some of whom were expertly educated, would utilize a dangerous mixture of chemicals like ether and acetone to clean the coca paste, washing away the dirt until only the clean sparkling crystals of cocaine hydrochloride stayed. It was a harmful, bad-smelling method. One error, one lost flame, and the whole laboratory could explode in a fire. But the earnings were huge. A kilogram of coca paste purchased for a few hundred in the Bolivian forest could be changed into a kilogram of clean cocaine worth thousands of dollars in Santiago and tens of thousands in the United States or Europe. The early Chilean traffickers created the paths, flying the completed item to waiting points in Central America and the Caribbean, or using mules, human carriers, to bring tiny amounts on business flights. They were constructing the very first version of a worldwide delivery network based on a single strong item. Then history stepped in. In 1973, a military takeover, guided by General Augusto Pinochet, removed the socialist government of Salvador Allende in Chile. In the harsh attack that came after, Pinochet's fresh government had little patience for separate criminal businesses. Numerous of the created traffickers were captured, killed, or made to escape. The Chilean link was cut. But the requirement for cocaine in the United States and Europe hadn't disappeared anywhere. Actually, it was increasing quickly. A hole had been made, and nature, particularly the nature of underground markets, hates a hole. The company of improving coca paste and shipping the completed item needed a fresh location, and it discovered one just up the coast in a nation with an extended past of smuggling, a weak central government, and a group of driven, totally brutal, young individuals who were hungry for riches and strength. That nation was Colombia. The whole middle of weight of the cocaine business moved north. And in doing so, it prepared the ground for an explosion of violence and riches that the planet had never witnessed. The silent, businesslike smuggling of the Chilean time was about to be switched by something much more terrible. The device was about to be constructed. The individuals who constructed this device weren't from the traditional Colombian elite. They were from the rough working middle groups of towns like Medellin. They were individuals who had become with a chip on their shoulder, watching the old, wealthy families operate the nation from their private clubs and estates. They noticed cocaine not as a community fault, but as a historic chance, a vehicle for their own violent type of upward movement. And at the middle of this fresh group of narco-businessmen was one individual whose title would become the same as the medicine itself: Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria. Escobar wasn't a brilliant chemist or a master organizer. Not at first. His brilliance existed in his picture and his frightening absence of control. He started his work in the dirty criminal world of Medellin, stealing vehicles, smuggling cigarettes, and operating kidnapping for payment plans. He was realistic, savage, and had a natural grasp of the two powers that shift the planet: terror and wish. When the cocaine business started to move from Chile, Escobar didn't just notice an opportunity to join, he noticed an opportunity to rule. He realized that the actual wealth wasn't in just transporting a few kilograms. It was in managing the whole process of making from the plant to the road. It was in making the method industrial. He and his partners shaped what became called the Medellin Cartel. It was less a strict organized group and more a loose, strong partnership of traffickers who worked together to increase earnings and defend their company. There were the Ochoa brothers, Jorge Luis, Juan David and Fabio Jr., who arrived from a family of horse breeders and brought a touch of old-world company thinking to the business. There was Carlos Leda, a smart, strange and unstable German Colombian who admired both John Lennon and Adolf Hitler. Leda's big input was organization. He purchased a tiny island in the Bahamas named Norman's Cay and changed it into the best smuggling station. He constructed a landing strip, a radar structure, and cooled storage buildings. From this personal base, just a quick flight from the Florida shore, the cartel could fly plane load after plane, load of cocaine straight into the hungry American market. What Escobar and his partners did was use the rules of industrial money-making to a lawless business. They vertically combined. They paid for coca growing in Peru and Bolivia, making sure a steady flow of raw material. They constructed huge, spreading laboratory buildings deep in the Colombian forest called superlabs. These weren't sheds. They were tiny towns. They had airplane shelters, sleeping places for the hundreds of workers, eating areas, electricity makers, and advanced chemical handling tools. At buildings like Tranquilandia, they could make 10 to 20 tons of clean cocaine every single week. Tons. The size was nearly unthinkable. They were no more smugglers. They were makers making an item for a worldwide market on a factory line of amazing speed. The organization of transporting the item were just as bold. Groups of tiny aircraft, each bringing several hundred kilograms, made the trip from Colombia to Norman's Cay or dropped their waterproofed cargo into the ocean to be collected by speedboats. They even put money in submarines, rough diesel-powered, boats that could bring a ton or two of cocaine while underwater, making them nearly unseen to law officers. And then there was the wealth. The earnings were so huge they became an organization problem on their own. Billions of dollars in money, mostly tiny bills from road sales in the United States, had to be carried back to Colombia. It was packed into suitcases, filled into the landing equipment of personal planes, hidden inside television boxes and refrigerators. The cartel was using thousands of dollars a month just on rubber bands to bundle the piles of money. Pablo Escobar at his top was guessed to be one of the richest individuals in the planet, with a personal wealth in the tens of billions. He was richer than numerous countries. With this unbelievable wealth arrived unbelievable strength, and Escobar planned to utilize it to twist the whole country of Colombia to his desire. His company plan was straightforward, and he expressed it with chilling clearness: plata o plomo, silver or lead. For any policeman, judge, politician, or reporter who stood in his path, there was a selection. You could take a payment, the silver, and ignore becoming rich in the method. or you could refuse, and you and your family would get the lead, a bullet. It was a campaign of dishonesty and fear, waged on an industrial size. The cartel carefully sneaked into every level of the Colombian government. They had judges on their payment list who would throw out any charges against them. They had police leaders who would give security for their shipments. They had politicians who would stop any rule that endangered their interests, most notably the removal agreement with the United States, which the traffickers feared more than a Colombian jail. Escobar himself, in a move of amazing arrogance, had himself chosen as an alternate to the Colombian Congress in 1982, looking for the acceptance and legal protection that arrived with the office. But when charm and money were not sufficient, the cartel released the lead, and they did so with a wildness that threw Colombia into a condition of civil battle. The Minister of Justice, Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, who dared to criticize Escobar and remove him of his congressional protection, was shot down in his vehicle in Bogotá in 1984. Luis Carlos Galán, a charming presidential hopeful who made the battle against the cartels the main part of his effort and was the obvious frontrunner to win, was killed at a community gathering in 1989. They put a bomb on Avianca Flight 203 in an effort to murder another presidential hopeful, Cesar Gaviria, who wasn't on board, killing all 107 individuals on the plane. They set off a huge truck bomb outside the headquarters of the DAS, Colombia's security office, murdering 70 individuals and hurting hundreds. This wasn't wrongdoing. This was narco-fear. These weren't the actions of a simple gang. They were the actions of a matching government, a business group with its own military and its own international plan, fighting a battle against a ruling country. The Medellin cartel, beneath the guidance of Pablo Escobar, had taken the straightforward coca plant and changed it into a tool of huge uncertainty. They had constructed a device that made not just a medicine, but an empire of dishonesty, habit, and terror, powered by a limitless river of white substance flowing north, an empire that held a whole nation hostage, pushing its individuals to select every single day between silver and lead. While the planet's cameras and titles were focused by the explosive, nearly dramatic violence of Medellin, a very separate type of group was silently building its strength a few hundred kilometers to the south in the sunbright town of Cali. If Pablo Escobar was a narco-war leader, a person of chaotic community cruelty, his competitors in Cali were something more current, and in numerous ways much more evil. They were the board of leaders of a worldwide business whose main item happened to be cocaine. They named themselves Los Caballeros de Cali, the gentlemen of Cali, and they developed this picture with careful attention. Theirs wasn't the route of the car bomb and the community killing. Theirs was the route of the silent payment, the pressured politician, the influenced judge. They realized a basic truth that Escobar in his self-love frequently forgot. Genuine strength is not the power to explode a structure, but the power to make sure nobody is ever charged for it. The cartel was a partnership, a collaboration of four main people, each with a separate role. At the top were the brothers Gilberto and Miguel Rodriguez Orejuela. Gilberto, the older, was called El Ajedrecista, the chess player. He was the planner, the dreamer, the community appearance of their proper companies. He was an individual who shifted easily in the highest groups of Colombian community, a respected banker and charity giver. His brother Miguel was the details of the work, the CEO who handled the day-to-day organization of a worldwide trafficking empire. He was more secretive, more ruthless, the iron hand inside Gilberto's soft glove. Together, they had constructed a company kingdom that started harmlessly sufficient with a series of drugstores. They grew into banking, property, and even possessed the town's loved football team, America de Cali. These weren't just covers. They were highly successful, proper businesses that provided the brothers huge community and political power, and just as significantly gave the ideal system for cleaning the billions of dollars that would quickly arrive, flowing in. The different two partners were experts. Helmer Herrera, called Pacho, was the organization and delivery brilliant. From his foundation in Cali, he watched over the complex transportation systems that transported cocaine out of Colombia and importantly handled the huge and complex delivery groups within the United States, especially in New York City. The fourth individual was José Santa Cruz Londoño, or Chepe. He was the cartel's representative, its leader. It was Santa Cruz who in the late 70s and early 80s had personally traveled to New York to construct the bases of their American work. He wasn't a gangster kicking down doors. He was a business person, opening accounts, renting storage buildings, and creating alliances. He realized the American market better than anybody. He understood its patterns, its hungers, its weaknesses. The Cali plan was constructed on information and sneaking. They put more money in technology and human knowledge than they did in foot soldiers. Their counterintelligence powers were famous, matching those of a national government. They carefully paid workers of the Colombian phone business, permitting them to listen to nearly every phone call in and out of Cali. They had police officers, military leaders, politicians, and reporters on their payment list. Their spies were throughout. A lawyer thinking about taking on a situation against them could get a polite phone call in which the caller explained the path his kids took to school that morning. No clear danger was required. The report was realized. This made a cover of quiet and cooperation that made them appear untouchable. They worked not beyond the rule like Escobar, but from within it, twisting its arms until it provided their reasons. Their organization improvements were just as advanced. While Medellin still depended on filling suitcases or using tiny planes, Cali thought on an industrial size. They realized that the finest method to conceal a tree is in a forest. Cocaine was melted in chemicals and combined with proper shipments. It was concealed inside hollowed-out wood, combined into shipments of coffee seeds, or hidden within concrete fence posts that were delivered by the container load to building businesses they possessed in the United States. Opening these shipments needed industrial saws and chemical methods far past the powers of a typical customs check. One of their most clever methods involved shipping thousands of boxes of frozen broccoli to Miami. Concealed among the proper produce were boxes where the broccoli had been switched with carefully made green-colored copies made of clean cocaine. To an interested agent, it was just another platform of frozen vegetables in a cooled storage building filled with thousands just like it. They made money cleaning an art shape. Their money system covered the globe, utilizing a complex web of shell businesses, offshore banks in Panama and the Caribbean, and proper companies to clean their earnings until they were impossible to tell from clean wealth. They hired the finest lawyers and accountants to move through and use worldwide financial rules at their top in the early 90s. After Escobar's death, the Cali cartel was guessed by the DEA to be responsible for 80% of the planet's cocaine supply. They were a silent, skilled, vertically combined control, shadow government whose power extended from the coca fields of the Andes to the highest halls of strength in Bogota, and whose item was being brought with business accuracy to a market that was shouting for it. And where was all of this carefully packaged, industrially delivered, and expertly cleaned substance going? It was flowing north in a huge white river to a country that was prepared to get it with open arms and open wallets. America, in the late 70s and 1980s, was a nation in the middle of a deep cultural change. The hangover of Vietnam and the doubt of Watergate were giving way to a fresh, shameless time of drive-buying and self-pleasure. It was the time of Reagan, of greed is good, of Wall Street giants and Hollywood blockbusters. It was a time that worshipped speed, achievement, and position, and cocaine, as if created in a laboratory for this very moment, became its ideal power. Unlike the medicines of the 60s counterculture, marijuana and LSD, which were linked with dropping out and growing awareness, cocaine was the medicine of the hopeful. It was for winners. It didn't make you calm. It made you sharp. It didn't make you thoughtful. It made you confident. It offered to make you cleverer, more active, more imaginative, more strong. It was the best decoration for the yuppie, the young city expert climbing the business ladder. It was a line of clean white confidence, cut and breathed in the bathroom stall before a big show. A touch on the gums before a high-stakes talk. On the wild trading floors of Wall Street, it was the machine that permitted brokers to survive 20-hour days, to yell into phones, to handle dizzying amounts of information, and to celebrate huge earnings within just as huge party. In the private backrooms of Hollywood film companies, multi-million-dollar deals were closed over glass tabletops covered with white substance. It was the inspiration for screenwriters, the rocket power for rock stars, the secret pleasure of actors and actresses, whose ideal smiles decorated the covers of magazines. The medicine lost its back alley shame and walked into the bright lights. Nowhere was this change more Clearer than its Studio 54, the famous New York nightclub that worked as the center of 1970s disco-time wild living. Behind its velvet ropes, a selected world of celebrity, fashion, art, and money crashed in a nightly show of too much, and at the middle of it all was cocaine. It was passed around on silver trays like appetizers. The club's popular logo, a man in the moon with a silver spoon to his nose, was a bold, winking acceptance of the club's medicine of selection. Here, cocaine wasn't a dirty mystery. It was the community oil that powered the whole sparkling device. It was a mark of being part of the in-group, of having come. The tools themselves became a position mark. Gold razor blades for cutting ideal lines, fancy silver spoons for careful bumps, polished mirrors and marble slabs as serving plates. The ceremonies of use were worshipped, a show of advanced pleasure. Common culture showed and increased this beauty. Films like Scarface, while a warning story, also showed a fascinating picture of narco-riches and strength. Songs on the radio subtly and sometimes not so subtly talked about the white horse or the snow that powered the nightlife. It was throughout. For a short, exciting moment, cocaine was more than a medicine. It was a cultural happening, a shortcut for achievement, a holy object of the fresh religion, drive. This hungry requirement made a feedback circle of amazing strength. The more cocaine America used, the more wealth flowed south. And the more wealth flowed south, the more strong and advanced the Colombian cartels became. The gentlemen of Cali watched this explosion in requirement, not with the wild eyes of road sellers, but with the cool thinking of market experts. They increased making, improved their organization, and simplified their delivery structures to satisfy the requirements of their finest and most successful buyer. The United States was a market of unmatched size, and they were the only providers of its most popular item. The earnings were past understanding, sufficient to purchase armies, remove governments, and change whole money systems. But the beauty was constructed on a chemical, and that chemical was about to be redesigned. A luxury item by its very nature keeps out, and the rules of the market, like the rules of chemistry, are constant. Somebody somewhere was certain to discover a method to make the champagne of medicines affordable for everybody. They did, and in doing so, they released a storm that would rip through the very material of American community. The chemistry was cruelly straightforward. It didn't need an advanced laboratory or an educated chemist. It could be finished in a kitchen pot with typical household ingredients by taking cocaine, hydrochloride, the costly powder shape, and combining it with a straightforward foundation like baking, soda and a little water, then heating it. One could free the cocaine from its hydrochloride salt. As the mixture cooled, the mind-active cocaine foundation would separate out, hardening into tiny crystalline pieces or rocks. The method made a separate crackling noise as the water boiled off, and so the fresh material received its title, crack. This straightforward chemical change altered everything. First, it altered the path of use. Unlike powder, which was breathed, crack was smoked. Breathing the vaporized cocaine brought the medicine to the brain through the huge area of the lungs in a few seconds. The outcome was a joyful rush that was many times more strong and instant than anything breathing could give. It was a full-body blast of enjoyment, a huge wave of dopamine that people explained as the most deep high they had ever felt. But this unbelievable top was sadly short. The strong joy lasted for maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and was right away followed by an just as strong crash. A fall into sadness, worry, and a desperate, all-taking desire to feel that high once more. This quick cycle of very high and crushing low made a habit of unmatched speed and wildness. Individuals who had only tried with powdered cocaine discovered themselves hopelessly hooked on crack after just a few uses. The second, and maybe most important, change was money-based. In the middle 80s, a gram of powdered cocaine could sell on the road for $100. For numerous individuals, particularly in poor communities, this was an impossible cost, a luxury they could never pay for. Crack cocaine destroyed that money barrier. That same gram of powder could be cooked into many rocks, and a single rock could be marketed for as little as $2, $3, or $5. This was the main point. It was a strike of twisted marketing brilliance. The medicine was now made available to everyone, its cost point reachable to almost anybody. It created a huge untapped market in America's inner towns. communities previously emptied out by decades of factory loss, white escape, and system neglect. The storm struck these neighborhoods with the power of a hurricane. In towns like New York, Los Angeles, Detroit, and Washington, D.C., the coming of cheap, smokable cocaine made a fresh and frightening money system. Road corners that had been location to regional companies or kids playing stickball were changed overnight into open air. Medicine markets working 24 hours a day. A fresh generation of young, heavily armed road gangs appeared, battling savage territory battles for management of this hugely successful business. The amount of violence grew dramatically. The silent deal in a nightclub bathroom was switched by the shootout on a home road. The community material of these neighborhoods started to fall apart. Crack house, an abandoned or taken apartment where people could purchase and smoke the medicine became a mark of the decay, a spot where all community rules broke down. Families were ripped apart as habit took control. Parents marketed their belongings and then themselves to chase the following 5-minute high, leaving their kids ignored. A generation of kids were created to addicted mothers, and the media, in a rush of ethical fear, created the phrase crack babies, painting a frightening and frequently overstated picture of a permanently harmed generation of brain-damaged infants. While the extended term medical science showed to be more complicated and less evenly disastrous than these earlier reports suggested, the instant community truth for these kids, created into chaos, poverty, and trauma, was certainly terrible. The answer from the media and the government wasn't one of community health worry, but of battle. Nightly news shows were filled with dramatic, shocking tales of crack-powered violence and city decay. The picture shown was frequently race-based. The medicine person was no more the beautiful Wall Street broker or Hollywood star, but a young, threatening black individual. This constant media story increased a nationwide fear, and politicians ready to look strong on wrongdoing rushed to pass harsh rules. The most important of these was the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986. This piece of law, approved in a rush of pre-election panic, carved the amazing difference in punishment into federal rule. It required that the holding of just 5 grams of crack cocaine would cause the same 5-year required minimum jail sentence as the holding of 500 grams of powder cocaine. This was the well-known 100-to-1 punishment difference. The thinking, if one could name it that, was that crack was more habit-forming and linked with more violence and so required a harsher punishment. The real results of this rule were disastrous and deeply unfair. The usual person of costly powder, cocaine, was more probably to be white and middle class and was seldom captured for straightforward holding. The usual person and low-level seller of cheap crack cocaine was much more probably to be poor and African American and was aimed by forceful road-level policing. The outcome was the mass jailing of a generation of young black individuals. Jail numbers in the United States exploded. Families were destroyed not only by habit, but by a punishment justice structure that sent fathers, sons, and brothers away for years, sometimes decades, for non-violent medicine crimes. The rule did little to stop the flow of medicines, but it succeeded in destroying previously weak communities, deepening cycles of poverty, and making a deep and lasting feeling of unfairness. So the tale of cocaine in America became a story of 2 deeply separate worlds, decided by chemistry and class. In the penthouse apartments of Manhattan, it stayed a careful, if risky, pleasure, the substance that powered drive and too much. But in the housing projects of the South Bronx, its cheaper, smokable shape became a mark of community breakdown, a trigger for a battle on medicines that was in action, a battle on the poor. 2 sides of the same white coin, one celebrated as the power of the elite, the different blamed as the poison of the underclass. It was the best sad expression of a substance that had for a century fooled the planet with its offer of strength only to bring ruin in its path. The gentlemen in Cali, reading their accounting sheets and money reports, probably paid little attention to the particular shape their item took once it reached the American buyer. To them, it was all just an issue of market control, of satisfying requirement, of numbers on a sheet. But the numbers on the road told a very separate tale. A tale of chemistry, money-making, and a deep developing American sad story. And so, in the big theatre of community plan, the curtain rose on a fresh and scary act, the sparkling white substance, once the favorite of thinkers and the power of upper community, had discovered a fresh, more explosive shape, cooked down with baking soda and water. It became something hard, something cheap, something that could be smoked. It was named crack, and it burned through the inner towns of America like a ghost fire, leaving community destruction in its path. The media, never wanting to miss a good fear, found the flames with nightly pictures of so-called crack babies and chaotic city scenes. The crowd required action, and in Washington, a town that operates on the twin powers of terror and chance, action was quickly brought. The enemy was no more a personal fault or a community sickness. It was now a life-or-death danger, and it needed a statement of battle. This wasn't the first time the phrase had been utilized. Naturally, Richard Nixon had created it years earlier, but the battle he stated was a government matter of cure centers and groups. The battle of the 1980s, boosted by the crack disaster, was separate. It was a real battle, with battlefield soldiers and a death number. It started, as numerous such projects do, with a sheet of paper, the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986, a paper created of ethical confidence and election thinking. It was a masterpiece of law anger. At its center was the idea of the required minimum sentence. The detailed art of court choice was pushed aside in favor of a rigid, savage math. Hold 5 grams of crack cocaine, the weight of 2 sugar packets, and you were promised a minimum of 5 years in federal jail. To get the same sentence for powder cocaine, the medicine of selection for the richer, whiter suburbs, you would require to be caught with 500 grams, a 100 to 1 difference written into rule. The thinking was straightforward and destroyingly wrong. Crack was viewed as more habit-forming, more violent, more city. The rule didn't just aim a medicine, it aimed a group of people. The machinery of the government started to turn, grinding with a fresh and frightening power. The lines became unclear between policing and military actions. Extra military equipment, once meant for battlefields in foreign lands, started to trickle, then flow into the weapons. Stores of regional police departments, armoured, personnel vehicles, M6 guns, flashbang grenades. The friendly neighbourhood cop was switched by a fresh person, a warrior dressed in black armour and a protection helmet, armed for a small-scale attack. The main method of the fresh battle was the no-knock attack. In the middle of night, doors would break, families would be thrown to the ground, and homes would be searched violently in hunt of that crystalline rock or white substance. The battle was battled not in trenches, but in living rooms and bedrooms across the nation. And like any correct battle, it had a foreign theatre. The thinking was straightforward, supply-side money-making, filtered through the view of a military planner. If the requirement at home was unstoppable, then the only answer was to stop the supply at its beginning. All eyes turned south to the green valleys of the Andes and the steamy forests of the Amazon area where the simple coca plant was grown. The United States, through the Drug Enforcement Administration and the CIA, started to pour billions of dollars into Latin America. The plan had a clean, nearly farming title, eradication, but its doing was nothing but clean. Low-flying planes, frequently flown by American contractors, would sweep over the Colombian and Peruvian countryside, spraying a thin mist of glyphosate plant killer. The chemical mixture known as Roundup was created to murder the coca vegetation. It did its work, but it didn't separate. It murdered yucca, coffee and banana crops too. It poisoned water sources and made livestock sick. It pushed poor farmers who grew coca just because it was the only crop that promised a living deeper into poverty and into the arms of the very traffickers. The plan was supposed to weaken. The US additionally armed and educated regional militaries, changing national armies into drug-battling helpers. They constructed radar stations, gave Black Hawk helicopters, and exchanged knowledge to hunt down the so-called crime lords. The main tool of this foreign plan was removal. The danger of being flown north in chains to face trial in an American courtroom, far from the judges you could pay and the witnesses you could frighten, was the one thing the cartel leaders actually feared. Pablo Escobar, the ruler of Medellin, famously stated he would prefer have a grave in Colombia than a jail cell in the United States. He battled a bloody, fearful battle against his own government to stop it, bombing airplanes and killing presidential hopefuls. He and his competitors in the Cali cartel were the main aims. They were the appearances of the enemy shown on television displays, Their huge riches and casual cruelty, the ideal villains for this worldwide drama. And slowly, carefully, the plan appeared to succeed. Through a mixture of constant pursuit, inside betrayals and bloody shootouts, the big Colombian cartels of the late 20th century were taken apart. Escobar was shot down on a rooftop in Medellin in 1993. The leaders of the Cali cartel were captured or gave up a few years afterward. From the Situation Room in the White House to the DEA field offices in Bogotá, there was a clear feeling of winning. The heads of the serpent had been cut off, but nobody appeared to ask what would occur to the serpent's body. Nobody appeared to notice that while they had been battling one battle, they had accidentally made the ideal conditions for another, more powerful monster to climb from the dust. The old structure had a certain savage clearness. The Colombians, the cartels of Medellin and Cali, were the makers and the wholesalers. They managed the whole method from the coca paste laboratories in the forest to the multi-ton shipments flown or sailed northward. But they had a weakness, the last, most harmful leg of the trip, the 954 miles of the US-Mexico border. It was a porous, dangerous scene of desert scrub and shallow rivers, a spot they didn't understand and didn't manage. For this last delivery, they required experts. They required subcontractors. And so they turned to the groups that had been operating contraband across that border for generations. Small-time smuggling families from Sinaloa, Chihuahua, and Baja California who understood the paths, the patterns of the border patrol, and the corruptible nature of officials on both sides. At first, the deal was straightforward. The Mexicans were paid a flat charge for their work. A few $1,000s in money for every kilogram of cocaine they successfully transported into the United States. They were the carriers, the truck drivers, the mules. They were organization people, nothing more. The individual who first noticed the genuine chance in this deal was a former police officer from Sinaloa named Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. He was called El Padrino, the Godfather. He wasn't a showy murderer like Escobar. He was a business person, a dreamer. He noticed that the genuine strength existed not in making the medicine, but in managing its route to market. He brought together the separate smuggling families into a single, connected partnership, the Guadalajara Cartel. He managed the plazas, the successful smuggling passages, that were the doorways into the American dream. For a while, the structure operated beautifully for everybody. The Colombians had a dependable delivery system, and Felix Gallardo's group became rich on transport charges, but then the demand of the battle on medicines started to alter the balance as the US and Colombian governments constantly hunted Escobar and the Cali Rodriguez brothers. Their actions became broken. Their money flow was disturbed. They became desperate. And in their desperation, they provided Felix Gallardo and his partners an opening. The Mexicans started to alter the conditions of the deal. They no more wanted money. Money was bulky, hard to clean. They wanted something much more important. They wanted a piece of the item. Instead of a charge, they started to require payment in kind. They would take 35, then 40, then finally 50% of every cocaine shipment they transported. It was a plan master move, a silent revolution in the criminal world. With that single change, the Mexican groups were changed. They were no more just the delivery people. They were now wholesalers with their own stock, their own item to sell, and straight access to the biggest consumer market on earth. They started to construct their own delivery systems in American towns, removing the Colombian middlemen totally. The drop of the big Colombian cartels, celebrated as a huge winning in Washington, made a strength hole of huge proportions, and into that hole walked the freshly powered Mexican partnerships, the capture of Felix Gallardo in 1989, a result of the political firestorm following the torture and murder of DEA agent Enrique Camarena, didn't halt the device he had constructed. It only made it break apart into its parts, each one now a strong group on its own. The old Guadalajara cartel broke into the cartels we understand today in the Northwest. The driven and violent Arellano Felix brothers took management of the Tijuana Plaza, the successful doorway to California. In the middle, Amado Carrillo Fuentes, nicknamed the Lord of the Skies for his group of Boeing 727s used to fly cocaine straight from Colombia, took over the Juarez Plaza. And in the mountains of Sinaloa, a farmer's son of short height but limitless drive, Joaquin Guzman Loera, El Chapo started to build strength with his partners, shaping what would become the Sinaloa Cartel. The power had been permanently changed. The Colombians, once the clear rulers, were now reduced to simple providers, made to sell their item to the Mexicans at the beginning. The Mexicans now managed the whole organization chain north of Colombia. They managed the paths, the costs, and the earnings. They were no more subcontractors. They were the board of leaders. A fresh narco leadership had been created, with its Vatican in Culiacan and its branches in Tijuana, Juarez, and Matamoros. They were richer, more advanced, and more deeply planted than their Colombian ancestors had ever been. The battle to murder the crime lords of Medellin and Cali hadn't finished the rule. It had just cleared the path for a fresh, more strong family line to take the throne. The United States had used a decade and billions of dollars killing one dragon, only to discover it had made a hydra, and this fresh beast was increasing. On its very doorstep, the huge river of wealth flowing north was now matched by an just as huge river of wealth flowing south. Tens of billions of dollars a year. A money flow bigger than the gross national product of numerous tiny countries pouring back into Mexico. This unmatched riches permitted the cartels to experience a last frightening change. They started to develop past the size of a traditional criminal group. They were no more just traffickers. They were becoming something else totally. A matching government, a narco-government, existing within and alongside the official Mexican government. Sometimes working with it, sometimes battling it, but constantly challenging its rule. This change started with dishonesty, an age-old practice made perfect to an industrial size. The selection provided to officials, from the regional cop on the beat to the federal prosecutor, from the small-town mayor to the cabinet minister, was cruelly straightforward. Plata o plomo, silver or lead, a briefcase full of money or a coffin full of you. Most selected the silver. Police departments became personal security forces for the cartels. Military leaders would leak knowledge on troop movements. Politicians would approve rules good to their bosses. The dishonesty became so throughout that it was no more an oddity. It was the working structure. The government wasn't just sneaked into, it was taken over. Its organizations emptied out and reused to provide the interests of the traffickers. But the narco government is constructed on more than just payments. It gives services. In numerous countryside parts of Mexico, forgotten by the central government, the regional cartel became the actual power. If a farmer had a disagreement with his neighbor, he didn't travel to the police, he traveled to the regional boss. The cartel paved highways, constructed churches, paid for festivals, and gave out money to the poor. They gave employment in a nation with limited chances. They provided a shape of quick, if savage, fairness. They became the government, the bank, and the community safety system all combined into one. They were purchasing not just quiet, but loyalty, weaving themselves into the very material of the communities they managed. This community management was the soft strength that went with their hard strength, and that hard strength became actually powerful. The cartels started to arm themselves, not like gangsters, but like armies. They created training camps in distant mountains and forests, frequently operated by former Special Forces soldiers from Mexico, Guatemala, and even the United States. A fresh group, Los Zetas, showed this change. They weren't traditional smugglers who had become violent. They were violence experts who had entered smuggling. Originally shaped as an elite enforcement wing for the Gulf Cartel from a corps of deserters from the Mexican Army's Airborne Special Forces Group, the Zetas brought a fresh amount of military order and technical advancement to the criminal world. They were the first to utilize military methods, to organize attacks utilizing coded communications, and to completely accept fear as a tool of management. Their weapons stores were amazing. They got 50 caliber sniper guns able of stopping engine blocks, rocket-propelled grenades, automatic grenade launchers, and even anti-aircraft tools. They constructed their own armored fighting vehicles, called monstruos, monsters, by welding thick steel plates onto heavy-duty trucks, making rough but working personnel vehicles. They fought the Mexican military in intense battles that lasted for hours, sometimes days. They shot down helicopters. They blocked whole towns. The traditional lines of battle became hopelessly unclear. This was no more an issue of wrongdoing battling. It was a low-intensity civil battle, battled block by block in towns like Juarez, Tijuana, and Culiacan. The most chilling show of this strength arrived in October of 2019. The Mexican military, with US knowledge support, started an action in Culiacan, the center of the Sinaloa cartel's territory, to capture Ovidio Guzman, one of El Chapo's sons. They succeeded briefly. Within minutes, the town exploded. Hundreds of cartel gunmen, heavily armed and perfectly organized, poured into the roads. They created burning blockades, attacked military foundations, took management of the town's airport, and took soldiers' families hostage. The battling was shown live on social media, a show of government failure. The Mexican security forces were outmaneuvered, outgunned, and overpowered. After hours of strong fighting, the order arrived straight from the President of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. To prevent further bloodshed, he ordered the army to stand down and release Ovidio Guzman. The cartel had won. They had confronted the full strength of the Mexican government in open battle and made it retreat. It was a moment of deep shame for the government and a frightening explanation for the planet. It showed that in specific parts of Mexico, the government's control on violence, the very meaning of a ruling country, no more existed. The narco-government was no more a shadow government. In the roads of Culiacan, for one bloody afternoon, it was the only government there was. The substance had done more than corrupt a few officials. It had paid for an uprising that now held a country hostage. A silent, creeping takeover financed 1 gram at a time. The American market, for all its hunger, was limited. By the late 80s and into the 90s, the towns of the United States were swimming in cocaine. Costs had steadied. Competition was murderous, and law officers, however clumsy, were starting to apply a more steady demand. The Colombian cartels, ever the forward-thinking worldwide businesses, realized a basic rule of company, market variety. They required a fresh frontier, a fresh continent of wallets to open and nostrils to fill, and so their look turned eastward across the huge and isolated expanse of the Atlantic to the old continent. Europe, with its rich towns, its created business paths, and its own silent hungers, was the following logical prize. This was the creation of the Second Front, a European passage that would change the worldwide flow of the substance, and tangle a whole fresh cast of characters in its tail. At first, the methods were nearly charmingly straight. A carrier on a business flight from Bogota to Madrid, luggage lined with a few cautiously pressed kilograms. A tiny shipment concealed within a container of coffee seeds or bananas, meant for the ports of Lisbon or Naples. These were tests, investigations into a fresh market, checking the defenses and mapping the requirement. But the Colombians learned rapidly that Europe wasn't America. The borders were separate, the languages more many. The law officers' agencies a broken patchwork of areas. They couldn't just copy the Miami plan. They required partners, they required regional knowledge, and so they entered, company with the most skilled and powerful organized, wrongdoing partnership in Europe. A group that made the Sicilians of Cosa Nostra appear nearly showy and careless by comparison. They were the individuals from Calabria, the mountainous toe of Italy's boot. They were the 'Ndrangheta for decades. The 'Ndrangheta had worked in the darkness, a spreading family-based hydra with arms, reaching from their countryside homelands to the money centers of the north and across the globe. They were masters of organization, especially sea organization. They managed, through a mixture of dishonesty, frightening, and proper company fronts, the huge container port of Gioia Tauro. It was an ideal doorway, a container ship coming from south. America could offload tens of thousands of containers. Discovering one particular box filled with cocaine concealed among frozen chickens or industrial machines was a job of unthinkable size for customs. Officials, particularly when port workers and transport union officials were on the 'Ndrangheta payment list. The partnership was a plan of criminal speed. The Colombians would handle making and across-ocean shipping. The 'Ndrangheta would promise safe passage into Europe through ports like Gioia Tauro, Rotterdam, or Antwerp, and then use their extensive, deeply planted systems to give out the item across the continent. It was a silenter, more business deal than the bloody road battles of Medellin. It was about shared risk and huge earning. The 'Ndrangheta showed to be perfectly dependable partners. They paid on schedule. They didn't ask too numerous questions, and they could transport tonnage with the skill that the Colombians deeply appreciated. Quickly, hundreds of kilograms became tons. the European cocaine market exploded. From the banking halls of London and Zurich to the nightclubs of Amsterdam and Berlin, the white substance became the common power for the continent's quick lane. But as the amount grew, the straight paths became riskier. European powers, waking up to the size of the issue, started to organize. Sea patrols grew. Port security was made tighter. The traffickers, as they constantly do, adjusted. They examined a map and noticed an answer, a location stepping stone that was both a shield and a shortcut. They noticed West Africa, the coastline extending. From Senegal down to Nigeria became the planet's big waiting area for cocaine. It was a smuggler's heaven, an area of amazing beauty scarred by poverty, political uncertainty, and poorest borders. Nations like Guinea-Bissau, a tiny country damaged by takeovers and dishonesty, became, for all purposes, the first genuine narco-governments outside of Latin America. The traffickers' thinking was straightforward and savage. Big mothership, a freighter or a fishing boat, would sail from the coasts of Colombia or Venezuela. It would meet smaller, quicker boats far out in worldwide waters off the coast of Cape Verde or Guinea. The cocaine, sealed in waterproof bundles, would be moved. These smaller boats would then rush to shore, landing on distant beaches or traveling up forgotten rivers, met by regional crews. Once on African ground, the substance was safe. It could be kept in storage buildings in Bissau or Conakry, guarded by paid officials or personal militias. The area previously had advanced, long-created smuggling systems, sharpened by decades of transporting everything from diamonds to cigarettes to individuals. Cocaine was just another item. From West Africa, the paths into Europe were many. The item could be repackaged and flown on business flights by armies of carriers. It could be concealed in cargo planes bringing fish or fruit to Paris and Brussels. Most boldly, it could be flown straight into the center of Europe on personal planes. Ghost flights that filed false flight plans and landed at tiny, poorly watched airfields in Spain or Portugal. The pure cleverness was something to see. They utilized semi-submersible boats, low-profile underwater submarines that could bring several tons of cocaine, gliding silently beneath the waves, nearly unthinkable to spot by radar or sonar. The European passage was no more a single route. It was a complicated, multi-layered web, a circulation structure pumping a white poison into the continent's bloodstream, and the Ndrangheta weren't the only participants for extended. The whole of the collapsed Soviet Union and the chaos of the Yugoslav battles had created a fresh generation of ruthlessly skilled criminal groups. Balkan partnerships, especially Serbian and Albanian groups, created themselves as big participants. They were ordered, multilingual, and very violent. They focused in the Overland Organization, transporting cocaine from the southern ports of arrival northward in trucks through the seamless, borderless expanse of the Schengen area. They managed the road-level distribution in towns across Germany, Scandinavia, and the United Kingdom. In the port towns of Antwerp and Rotterdam, the organization centers of Europe, the so-called Mokro Mafia, made up mostly of Dutch-Moroccan criminals, fought for management of the docks, their conflicts playing out in a string of shocking community killings. Europe's old world peace was broken. The continent had its own cocaine battle now, less visible than Colombia's maybe, but just as corrosive. Changing port towns into battlegrounds and silent villages in Africa into centers of worldwide wrongdoing. The substance, ever flexible, had discovered its fresh location, and then, as the 21st century continued, the nature of the substance itself started to alter. The tale takes another dark turn, not in the forests of the Andes or the boardrooms of the cartels, but in secret laboratories far away, and in the very chemistry of the medicines themselves. A fresh ghost had appeared, a synthetic ghost that would attach itself to the cocaine. Business with destroying results. Its title was fentanyl. It started subtly, as a quiet word in coroner's reports and toxicology displays. In the middle 2010s, a cocaine overdose, but with strange discoveries. The victim hadn't just halted breathing from cardiac arrest, the classic cocaine-caused outcome. They had just faded out, respiratory depression, the telling indication of an opioid. At first, it was thought to be a situation of the person combining medicines, a speedball of cocaine and heroin. But then the situations grew, and the victims were frequently individuals with no past of opioid consumption. They were weekend fighters, partygoers, individuals who thought they were purchasing a gram of cocaine for a night out. They had no concept they were taking in one. Of the most strong opioids ever made by person. Fentanyl is a creature of the laboratory, a clean synthetic first made in 1959 as a strong anesthetic for surgery. It is 50 times more strong than heroin, 100 times more strong than morphine. A dose the size of 2 grains of salt can be deadly to an individual with no opioid tolerance. For the current medicine partnership, especially the Mexican cartels, who had now mostly overshadowed the Colombians as the ruling power in the North American market, fentanyl was a company miracle. Its starter chemicals could be obtained cheaply from China. It could be made in a straightforward laboratory with no requirement for huge farming plantations, no coca farmers to handle, no seasonal harvests, and its strength was its biggest money benefit. A single kilogram of clean fentanyl, costing a few thousand to make, could be reduced and extended to make hundreds of thousands of separate doses for the road. The pollution of the cocaine supply was created of this cold market thinking. Sometimes it was accidental, a seller utilizing the same scale or combining area for both. Fentanyl-filled heroin and cocaine, a tiny, unseen residue was all it took, but increasingly it became purposeful. Reducing cocaine with a cheap, strong, and strongly habit-forming synthetic opioid was a monstrously successful company plan. It extended the costly cocaine, growing earning margins. And for those who survived, it could make a fresh, strong dependency, hooking a person on opioids without them even understanding it. The joyful rush of cocaine would be followed by the heavy narcotic pull of fentanyl, a confusing and frequently frightening mixture. The person would then desire that particular sensation once more, looking for the same seller, their brain chemistry now rewired by a material they never planned to take. The community health results were disastrous. The Cocaine Person Foundation is basically separate from the Heroin Person Foundation. Numerous are fun people who link their medicine of selection with energy, confidence, and late nights. They have no idea of opioid overdose, no Narcan on hand, no grasp of the risk of respiratory arrest.